One of the best ways to increase your efficiency as an editor, if not the best way to increase your efficiency as an editor, is to set up proper keyboard shortcuts. Now, when you come up with keyboard shortcuts, these are shortcuts that you can use on your keyboard that will do different functions or switch to different tools or do different things in your editing software. So you're not having to click around through menus. You don't have to look down at the keyboard or use your mouse to do as many things, which means that you can edit a lot faster and get things done a lot faster. So in this video, I will show you my keyboard shortcuts that I use and some of the most common ones that I use when I'm editing in order to edit quickly. But it's important to keep in mind that the actual keyboard shortcuts you use are not what's important. What matters is, number one, to use what's natural for you. So if you've used other software before and you're coming into new software, using some of the same keyboard shortcuts will be really beneficial to you because you've already developed that muscle memory. So using what's natural to you, what makes the most sense to you, is going to be way more important than using the exact same shortcuts that I use, because the ones that I use are come from different places that I've been, different software that I've used. It's kind of something that I've developed over years and it just works for me. It may not work for you, and that's totally fine. And the second thing, and probably the bigger thing to pay attention to when you're setting up keyboard shortcuts, the goal is to make it so that you don't have to look at the keyboard as often and so that you can do as many things as possible with one hand. So setting up your keyboard shortcuts so that you don't have to look down at the keyboard, and then setting up so you don't have to move your hand off the mouse over to the keyboard to do two-handed shortcuts. So the more you can set up shortcuts that allow you to do everything with your left hand, you can keep your right hand stays on the mouse all the time, and then your left hand can stay in editing position on the keyboard. The more you can do that, the better. So in your software, if you go to the keyboard shortcuts menu, you'll notice that it brings up a menu where it can allow you to see what keyboard shortcuts you already have set up and then set up new ones. If you want to set up new ones, it's usually done by going down here and finding the keyboard shortcut you want. So for example, if I search for the razor tool, I can find that. And you'll notice that that is bound right now to the C key. If I click on this little X right here, it will delete that shortcut. And if I click here one more time and type any key or key combination, it will apply that shortcut to that tool. Now, once you have your keyboard shortcuts all set up and ready to go, you can save a preset by clicking on Save As up here and putting in a name for it in this box. That way you can save your presets. If you were to ever go to maybe somebody else's computer, or if you upgrade your software, you can always get your keyboard shortcuts back and use the ones that you're familiar with, so that you can keep editing more efficiently. So now let's talk about some of the most common keyboard shortcuts that I use. So when I come into a project here, the first thing I do typically is to create a new timeline, and you can do that by pressing Command N. Now, when I say Command, if you're on a PC, that's going to be Control. Those are used interchangeably depending on which system you're on. So that will bring up the New Sequence tab. Now let's go ahead and put a clip on the timeline so that we have something to work with here. And here's some of the most common keyboard shortcuts that I use. So switching tools. I use the V shortcut to switch to the Select tool. The reason I used V, and actually some other softwares like Final Cut will use A for the Select tool, I use V because I come from the Adobe ecosystem. I've used Illustrator and Photoshop extensively in the past, and they both use V to go to the Select tool to actually select clips and stuff. So I'm using V to select that. Another tool that I use very often is the Slip tool. So the Slip tool is Y on my keyboard. The Slip tool will allow me to slide between sections of the clip and move the clip within these boundaries. So then I'll select Y. I will skim through it, find the clip that I want, hit V again, and then use these markers on the right and left to trim the size of the clip. All right, so now let's go through some of the most common keyboard shortcuts that I like to use. So when you come into a project, the first thing that you want to do is create a new sequence, and you can press Command N to do that. Now it's worth noting here, anytime I say Command, if you're on a PC, that's going to be Control. Those can be used interchangeably depending on which system you're in. So that'll bring up the prompt here to create a new sequence, and then you can click OK to create the sequence. I've already got a sequence here, so I'm just going to use this. Now for zoom, I use the T and the R keys. So T is to zoom in on my timeline, and R is to zoom out on my timeline. Now I want to note here that most software uses the plus and minus buttons for zoom, and you might think that makes more sense since plus and minus makes sense to zoom in and zoom out. The reason that I have that changed, well, there's two reasons. One is that, like I was mentioning before, I don't like having to either put my other hand on the keyboard, or I don't like having to look down at the keyboard. So in order to use plus and minus, it requires me to have to look down at the keyboard in order to move my hands there to zoom in and out. And it's just something that I do way too often to have to spend the time to look down at the keyboard or move another hand to the keyboard, which is why I have them moved over to T and R. The other reason, and really the main reason that this happened, is because I used to do music production. And so when I would use Pro Tools, which is one of the best music production tools out there, they had their keyboard shortcut by default set to T and R, and I got used to it that way. But I think it's just smart anyway because of what I explained a second ago. So T and R to zoom in or zoom out on the timeline. Now, obviously you can press space to play or pause the video. And then I press V to select a clip. So V chooses the select tool. Now in other software, this is typically the default is A. The reason I go to V is because my background is in Adobe products like Illustrator and Photoshop back when I used to do graphic design, and that's what they use is V for that. And so I'm used to that, and that's what I continue to use since the muscle memory is already there. Now once I have a clip selected with V, I can use the Y tool or the slip tool with the keyboard shortcut Y to change what I'm seeing within that clip. So that will move the clip forward or backwards as you drag within the boundaries of the clip that you've defined. Now, for a lot of clips, if you ever put a clip on your timeline that is bigger or smaller than the actual sequence that you're working with, you can press Shift S to scale to frame size. So for example, here I have a sequence that is in 1080p, but this clip is in 4K. So if I select the clip and I hit Shift S, that will do scale to frame size, which automatically scales it down to the size of the frame. Now, as we get into editing, when I select a clip, I can use the C button to choose the razor tool, or C for cut, to put cuts anywhere I want on a clip by clicking. There's other ways you can create cuts though, and that is if you have the playhead over the spot where you want the cut, you can just press Command K and it will cut the clip that you have selected, or if you press Command Shift K, it will cut all of the clips at that point. Now, if you ever have a clip that you want to disable so that you can't see it anymore, or if you have clips on top of each other and you're trying to see down another layer, you can use the disable function, which I have set to Command B. So when I do that, it will turn that clip off, and then I press Command B again and it will re-enable the clip. Another tool that I use very often is the Track Select Forward tool, and that is bound currently to the A key, which allows me to select a clip and it will select that clip and everything towards the end of the timeline. I can also hit Shift and it will just select only that track instead of selecting all of the tracks. And then I can also hit Shift A, which will turn on the Track Select Backwards tool, which does the opposite. Now, as far as getting around the timeline goes, you can actually use the left and right arrow keys to move forward and backward 1 frame at a time. And then if you hold Shift, it'll move forward or backward 5 frames at a time. Similarly, you can also move clips using this. So if I take a clip here and I use Command left and right, I can move the clip backwards or forwards 1 frame at a time. And again, if I hold Shift, I can move the clip 5 frames at a time. And if you want to move your clips up and down between tracks, you can hold Alt and press up or down to move them like that. Now, all the universal keyboard shortcuts that you're used to using on your system will also work in your software. So things like Command A to select all, or Command C to copy, and Command V to paste. So if I press Command C on this clip, it will copy it. And then if I move my playhead over here and press Command V, it will paste it where the playhead is. You can also hit Command Z to undo, or if you don't want to undo, you can press Command Shift Z to redo. Command S is to save your project. You can use Command W to close a window. So if I wanted to close this timeline, I could press Command W and it will close it. In the project window, I can use Command Shift W and it will close the entire project. And then I can press Command Q to close the entire program. So those are probably the most common keyboard shortcuts that I used, but let me go a little bit deeper and show you even some of the more advanced ones that I use to move around in Premiere. So when you're working with clips that have audio attached to them, when you select the clip, it will select both the video and the audio. If you ever want to do anything to this clip where it doesn't select both of them, so if I wanted to change the video and not the audio, I can hold Alt and it'll just select one of them. I can use this to select either the audio or the video, or even to do different effects to it. by changing the size of it or adding effects or doing whatever I need to just that clip rather than the clip and the audio. As well, for moving around the timeline, I will use very often the up and down keys to move between clips. So that will always move to the next clip as I click up, and then as I press down, it will move forward from clip to clip. Now this only, at least in Premiere, will only select the clips that are turned on over here on your video tracks. So if you have clips on other tracks, you need to make sure that those are turned on as well. Also, when it comes to zoom, rather than zooming in and out slowly like this every time, if you're working on a part of your clip that's close up like this, and you need to look at the whole timeline, you can hit the / or / key. You can hit the / key and that will zoom out to show your entire timeline. And then if you hit it one more time, it'll zoom back in. Another thing you can do on your timeline is nest a clip or a sequence of clips. So let's say I have this entire sequence and I want to nest it, which normally I would have to right click and click on nest here. Instead, what I'll do is just hit Shift N, and that will create a new nested sequence. And last but not least, for moving around Premiere Pro, at least, you can make any panel or window full screen by pressing the tilde key while your mouse is hovering over it. So if I hover my mouse over the timeline and I hit the tilde key, it will make it full screen, which makes it easier to get in and be able to see more things. Likewise, I can do the same thing with the project panel if I need to see more details about the footage in my project. So there you go. There's a lot of the keyboard shortcuts that I use regularly in Premiere Pro. Like I said, this will translate over to other software. Even though these are mostly in Premiere, the ones that I'm using, you can set them up however you want inside of your software. Again, the most important thing is not the actual specific shortcuts that I'm using, but make sure that you have shortcuts that are natural to you and that allow you to focus on editing without having to look down at the keyboard all of the time. So there you go. Hope that was helpful. If you have any questions about this, feel free to let me know.